Have you ever woken up wondering what you said in your sleep last night? There is a mechanism running in your brain right now that is supposed to keep your words inside while you sleep. Tonight, we look at exactly what happens when that system glitches and what it actually reveals about your mind. Here is the part most people get wrong. Sleep talking almost never says what you think it says. The science is stranger and far less dangerous than the stories. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Let's leave the noise of the day behind us. Subscribe to join our community of healthy sleepers. Before we dive deep, let's take one collective breath together. Inhale peace. Exhale the day. Now, let's look at the exact mechanism behind this. The voice that escapes in sleep is not the voice that knows your secrets. It is something older, stranger, and quieter than that. You're held in the soft static between language and silence, where the microphone left on picks up nothing but the hum of a resting mind. And now we begin. Sleep talking, known scientifically as somniloquy, is classified as a parasomnia, which is a category of sleep disorders involving abnormal behaviors, movements, or experiences during sleep. But here is the key word. Parasomnia includes conditions ranging from sleepwalking to night terrors, and somniloquy sits at the far milder end of that spectrum. Most people who talk in their sleep never seek treatment, never experience harm, and never even know it is happening unless someone tells them. Tonight's question is this: is what you say in your sleep a secret being pulled out of you, or simply the sound of your brain doing its ordinary, unglamorous maintenance work? Somniloquy can occur at any stage of sleep, not only during REM, the dreaming phase, but also during NREM stages, including the deepest stages of slow-wave sleep. This matters because it challenges the popular assumption that sleep talking is always a window into your dreams. When it occurs in deep NREM sleep, you are not dreaming at all. The words that emerge have no narrative attached to them. They are fragments, output from a language system that briefly fires without a story to carry. The same system that constructs sentences while you are awake continues, in an imperfect, unmoored way, to generate output while the rest of the brain has stepped back from the work. Research suggests that somewhere between 50 and 66% of people have talked in their sleep at some point in their lives. In children, the figure is even higher. Studies indicate up to 50% of children between the ages of 3 and 10 talk in their sleep regularly, with frequency declining significantly as they age. This is not a rare, edge case phenomenon. It is extraordinarily common enough that silence in sleep might be considered the exception, not the norm. If you have been quietly embarrassed by sleep talking, the first thing the science offers is scale. You are not unusual. You are in the majority. The content of sleep talking is, in the majority of documented cases, either unintelligible, emotionally neutral, or semantically incoherent. Studies where researchers have recorded and transcribed sleep speech consistently find that most utterances are brief, often fewer than 30 seconds, and contain fragmented grammar, incomplete sentences, or words strung together without logical connection. The dramatic, coherent confessions that appear in popular culture are exceedingly rare in the clinical literature. Most of what is said in sleep does not constitute a statement in any meaningful sense. It is output without destination, language running on the tracks it already knows, carrying nothing new. The mechanism behind sleep talking begins with something called motor inhibition, the process by which the brain suppresses physical movement during sleep. During REM sleep, the brainstem releases signals that essentially paralyze the voluntary muscles. This is why you do not act out most of your dreams. But this inhibition system is not a single on-off switch. It is a gradient, and the muscles of the larynx and mouth are among the last to be fully suppressed. When motor inhibition is incomplete, the speech system can fire even as the body remains largely still. The voice escapes not because the mind permits it, but because the door did not fully close. Broca's area and Wernicke's area, the two primary language regions of the brain, remain partially active during certain sleep stages. In REM sleep, neuroimaging studies have detected activation in language processing regions during periods of dreaming. When sleep talking occurs alongside dream activity, it may reflect a spillover, language that was being processed internally for the dream narrative, briefly crossing the threshold into vocalization. The brain does not intend to speak aloud. It simply fails to contain what it was already doing quietly inside. What leaks out is not a statement meant for anyone. It is processing that briefly became audible. Stress and sleep deprivation are among the most consistently documented triggers for increased sleep-talking frequency. When the brain is overtaxed, carrying emotional weight or running on insufficient rest, motor inhibition during sleep tends to be less complete. This creates a higher likelihood of verbal leakage. If you have noticed yourself or a partner talking more during stressful periods, this is likely the mechanism at work. It is not that stress forces honesty out. It is that stress depletes the system that keeps internal processing internal. The connection between a difficult week and a talking night is physiological, not confessional. Sleep talking has a measurable genetic component. Twin studies have found that identical twins are significantly more likely to both be sleep talkers than fraternal twins, suggesting a heritable basis for the trait. This does not mean the content of your sleep speech is genetically programmed. It means the underlying tendency toward incomplete motor suppression during sleep has a genetic dimension. Your brain's architecture, not your psychology, determines much of whether you talk in your sleep at all. The trait runs in families because the inhibitory system's efficiency runs in families. It is inherited hardware, not inherited personality. The genes set the threshold. They do not write the script. In cases where sleep talking has been recorded and the speech is intelligible, linguists and sleep researchers have noted that the content most often reflects recent waking day concerns, ongoing cognitive preoccupations, or generic social scripts. Greetings, commands, questions. What is notably absent in the bulk of recorded cases is novel information, secrets, or material the sleeper would actively suppress if awake. The brain in sleep rehearses what it already knows. When language surfaces, it surfaces from the familiar, the conversations already had, the faces already known, the words already worn smooth with use. Some sleep talking occurs in the hypnagogic and hypnopompic states, the transitional zones between wakefulness and sleep. In the hypnagogic state, as you drift towards sleep, the brain begins generating imagery and language fragments while still partially conscious. Words or phrases spoken here often sound coherent because they are closer to waking cognition, but they still reflect the brain entering, not exiting, its maintenance mode. The glitch in the microphone is already beginning before you are fully asleep. This is the central question at its clearest. Is this a revelation? Or is it just the system powering down? The border between those two answers is thinner than it seems. Fever has been clinically associated with increased sleep talking, particularly in children, during febrile illness. The brain's thermoregulation and its sleep structure are both disrupted simultaneously. The result is more frequent transitions between sleep stages, more fragmented motor suppression, and, correspondingly, more verbal output during sleep. Parents observing their sick child talking in their sleep during a fever are not witnessing psychological disturbance. They are observing a temperature-stressed brain, managing its load imperfectly. The fever disrupts the architecture that normally holds the voice inside. What emerges is not the child's inner truth. It is the sound of a system running too hot. Alcohol consumption significantly increases the likelihood and intensity of sleep talking. While alcohol initially deepens sleep, it disrupts REM structure across the night, suppressing REM in the first half and creating a rebound effect in the second half. During this REM rebound, motor inhibition is often less stable, producing more vivid dream activity and more frequent somatic outputs, including talking, movement, and even laughter. The increase in sleep talking after alcohol is not the brain becoming more truthful. It is the REM system struggling to reclaim the sleep stage it lost, compensating imperfectly, noisily, in the dark hours before morning. Sleep-related dissociation, a phenomenon where aspects of the nervous system cycle between wake and sleep states simultaneously, is one of the theoretical frameworks for understanding parasomnias, including sleep talking. In this model, somniloquy is not a single unified phenomenon, but rather a local dissociation. The language production system briefly enters a partial wake state while the rest of the brain remains asleep. This is why sleep speech can sometimes be grammatically structured. The language system itself is online, even as the narrative and memory systems remain offline. The grammar is intact. The speaker is not present. The output is real. The author is absent. The volume and emotional tone of sleep speech do not reliably correlate with the emotional content of whatever the person was dreaming or processing. Studies have recorded individuals screaming during sleep who, when awakened, reported dreams with no distressing content. And conversely, individuals speaking calmly during sleep who described intensely emotional dream experiences. The motor output is not a faithful readout of the emotional state. What you hear in someone's sleeping voice, the urgency, the flatness, the apparent distress, is the sound of the motor system activating, not a transmission of the feeling underneath it. Children talk in their sleep more than adults, and the mechanism likely relates to the immaturity of the inhibitory systems of the developing brain. In children, the prefrontal cortex, the region most involved in inhibitory control, is still undergoing significant development through adolescence. This incomplete inhibitory infrastructure means that suppression of motor activity during sleep is less efficient, and verbal leakage is correspondingly more common. Sleep talking in children is developmentally expected, not diagnostically concerning in the vast majority of cases. The child who talks in their sleep is not revealing a disturbed inner world. They are revealing a brain that has not yet finished building its gate. Some rare but documented cases involve sleep talking that is semantically coherent enough to constitute a brief conversation, the sleeper apparently responding to questions posed by someone in the room. Researchers studying this phenomenon have found that even in these coherent exchanges, the sleeper has no memory of the conversation upon waking, and the content rarely reveals anything they would not say while awake. What looks like a conversation from the outside is, from the inside, nothing. There is no experience, no intention, no awareness. The system responded. The person was absent. Those two things happened in the same body, at the same moment, without any connection between them. Sleep talking is not considered a symptom requiring treatment unless it is accompanied by other disruptive sleep behaviors, such as walking, violent movements, or significant sleep disruption for the person or their partner. In the International Classification of Sleep Disorders, isolated somniloquy is classified as a normal variant, not a disorder. This is a meaningful clinical distinction. The behavior most people worry about is, in the eyes of sleep medicine, not a malfunction. It is a quirk, a loose connection in an otherwise functional system. The clinical world has looked at this carefully and, in most cases, found nothing that needs fixing. The speech produced during NREM sleep stages is typically more fragmented and emotionally flat than speech during REM sleep. NREM sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, involves reduced activity in the limbic system, the emotional processing centers of the brain. As a result, any speech that leaks through during these stages tends to lack the emotional charge and narrative coherence of REM speech. If you have heard someone sleep talking in a monotone, they were likely in deeper NREM. The voice is not dulled by indifference. It is dulled by the absence of the neural systems that generate emotion. The flatness is not withholding, it is architecture. The partner of someone who talks in their sleep is often more disturbed by the phenomenon than the sleeper themselves. Research on sleep disorders in couples finds that secondary insomnia, sleep disruption caused by a partner's sleep behavior, is a significant source of sleep deficiency in long-term relationships. The sleeper experiences no distress, no memory, and no sleep disruption. The listener experiences all three. This asymmetry is one reason sleep talking generates disproportionate concern. The person holding the information is the one least capable of interpreting it accurately. Awake, alert, applying waking logic to a system that has gone somewhere else entirely. The content of sleep speech, when intelligible, frequently contains the pronouns I, you, and we, suggesting that even in sleep, social cognition remains active in some form. The brain continues to simulate social interaction, to rehearse relational dynamics, to process the ongoing project of human relationship. even as the body is at rest. When you hear your partner say a name in their sleep, you are not overhearing a confession. You are overhearing the social brain doing what it does continuously, organizing the people in its world, maintaining the maps of everyone who matters. The name that surfaces is activation, not admission. Studies using continuous overnight monitoring have mapped sleep-talking events to specific sleep stages with increasing precision. What these studies consistently reveal is that somniloquy events are brief, often lasting only seconds, and do not alter the overall pattern of sleep. They are not sustained periods of wakefulness. They are not signs of unresolved psychological conflict breaking through. They are transient, benign, and leave no trace in the sleeper's memory. The system closes the channel, continues its work, and moves forward as if nothing escaped. Because, functionally, nothing meaningful did. Some researchers have proposed that sleep-talking in REM sleep may serve a processing function, that vocalizing fragments of dream content could, in some cases, be part of the memory consolidation process. This is a speculative hypothesis rather than established science, and the empirical evidence is limited, but it offers an alternative framing. Rather than seeing sleep speech as a system failure, it may, in some cases, reflect the brain working, consolidating experience, testing language, running the social simulation one more time before morning. The voice may not be an alarm. It may, at times, be part of the work itself. Somniloquy in adults is more common in men than in women, though the research on this is not entirely consistent across studies. Some studies suggest the gender difference is related to differences in REM structure and in the prevalence of related sleep phenomena. Others suggest reporting bias. Women may be more likely to mention sleep talking to a physician, while men underreport it. The gender data on sleep talking, like much of sleep research, is still being refined. What is consistent is that neither gender has a monopoly on the phenomenon, or on the anxiety it generates in the people who witness it. The fear that one might reveal a genuine secret during sleep, tell a partner about an infidelity, confess to a misdeed, disclose a private wish, is not supported by the clinical literature on sleep-talking content. Studies that have analyzed the intelligible portions of recorded sleep speech find that it overwhelmingly reflects ordinary cognitive content fragments of recent conversations. Procedural memory, social navigation. The brain in sleep is not a truth serum. It is a processing facility running its nightly cycle. The content it produces is not selected for importance. It is simply what was running when the voice briefly found an opening. What the research consistently shows, across study after study, is that somniloquy is a parasomnia defined not by what it reveals, but by what it misfiles. A fragment of language that was meant to stay internal, briefly escaping before the system caught itself. If tonight's facts have begun to change the way you think about that voice in the night, the one that worries you, the one you have rehearsed explanations for, here is what 25 facts have already established. The mechanism is not a betrayal. It is a glitch. And glitches say nothing about the mind that runs them. Not one honest thing. The science is doing something specific in these first 25 facts. It is dismantling a story. The story that the sleeping mind is more honest than the waking one, that what escapes in the dark is what is truly meant. That story is intuitive, it is old, and the research, systematically, does not support it. Here is what I find most striking about this. The fear of talking in your sleep is rarely about the sleep talking itself. It is about what you believe it might say about you. And that belief, that your unconscious is a vault of things better left unsaid, is itself worth examining tonight. Notice the weight that belief has been carrying, because what we are about to find in the next 25 facts is that the mechanism runs deeper and quieter than most people imagine. The transition from waking to sleep is not a single threshold crossed, but a cascade of processes that disengage in a specific sequence. Attention narrows first, then voluntary motor control relaxes, then the thalamus, the brain's sensory relay station, begins closing its gates to external input. The language production system, located in the frontal and temporal lobes, is among the later systems to fully disengage. This sequencing means there is a predictable window in nearly every sleep onset during which language can still be generated, even as most other systems have already gone offline. Sleep spindles. One of the hallmarks of Stage 2 NREM sleep are among the most elegant features of the sleeping brain. They are brief, rhythmic bursts of neural activity. The brain, in a sense, tuning itself to stay asleep. They function partly by suppressing cortical responses to external stimuli that might otherwise wake the sleeper. Research has found that individuals with fewer sleep spindles show more fragmented sleep structure and more frequent parasomnia events. The density of your sleep spindles influences how intact your motor suppression remains throughout the night. Spindle density is, in a quiet sense, the architecture of your silence. The thalamus plays a critical regulatory role in the transition to sleep, and disruptions in thalamic function can increase the likelihood of parasomnias. The thalamus acts as a gatekeeper, filtering sensory input, coordinating cortical activity, and participating in the generation of the sleep spindles described in the last fact. When thalamic gating is inefficient, the sleeper is more vulnerable to partial arousals. Moments when certain brain systems briefly return to a wake-like state while the person remains asleep. Somniloquy may be one expression of this instability, the thalamus briefly releasing what it was holding. A significant body of sleep research focuses on microarousals, brief transitions from deep sleep to lighter sleep that occur throughout the night and that the sleeper rarely remembers. Most adults experience dozens of microarousals per night as a normal part of sleep cycling. During these moments, motor suppression temporarily lightens, and the probability of behavioral outputs, including sleep talking, rolling over, or briefly opening the eyes, increases. Sleep talking that occurs during microarousals is not a sign of emotional urgency. It is a byproduct of the cycling pattern of normal sleep. The hippocampus, the brain's primary memory consolidation structure, remains active during NREM sleep and is thought to replay the day's experiences for long-term storage during slow-wave sleep. This memory replay is internal. It generates neural patterns corresponding to recent events without producing the full behavioral experience. But there is evidence from animal studies and limited human research, suggesting that this replay can occasionally produce partial motor output, including vocalizations, particularly in individuals with less stable motor suppression. The brain rehearsing your day is not the brain betraying your day. It is the brain filing it. In REM sleep behavior disorder, a more severe parasomnia distinct from ordinary somniloquy, the motor paralysis that normally accompanies REM sleep is significantly compromised. People with this condition may physically enact their dreams running, punching, shouting. The speech during these episodes is more coherent and emotionally charged than typical somniloquy. What makes REM sleep behavior disorder significant is the link now established by research. Isolated REM sleep behavior disorder is recognized as a prodrome of neurodegenerative conditions, including Parkinson's disease. The gap between typical somniloquy and this condition is large and clinically distinct. If you or someone you know is regularly acting out dreams physically, that is different from sleep talking and worth discussing with a doctor. Sleep deprivation, specifically the kind that accumulates over multiple nights, progressively disrupts the pattern of REM sleep. In the sleep-deprived brain, REM sleep becomes more intense and more frequent as the nervous system attempts to compensate for the lost REM opportunity. This REM pressure can produce more vivid dreaming, higher rates of motor leakage, and increased sleep talking. It is a physiological consequence of sleep debt, not a psychological one. The more nights you have underpaid your sleep debt, the more your brain may try to recoup it loudly. Rest is the only real currency here. Caffeine consumed in the afternoon and evening has measurable effects on sleep structure that can indirectly increase sleep-talking risk. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors. Adenosine is the chemical that accumulates during waking hours and creates sleep pressure. By blocking adenosine, caffeine delays sleep onset, reduces slow-wave sleep, and can fragment sleep structure in ways that create more opportunities for partial arousals. The relationship between late caffeine consumption and nighttime vocalization is not dramatic, but it is physiologically coherent. Each coffee after 2 inches the afternoon is a small wager against the completeness of the night's inhibitory work. Some sleep researchers have examined the possibility that sleep talking represents a form of offline social cognition, the brain continuing to rehearse interpersonal dynamics, process relational conflicts, or simulate upcoming social situations during sleep. This hypothesis is consistent with the finding that sleep speech frequently involves social content, second-person pronouns, to commands, response. If this is correct, sleep talking may be less about hidden feelings and more about social preparation, the brain practicing the conversations it anticipates needing to have. The voice in the night may be a rehearsal, not a revelation, a draft, not a disclosure. The circadian rhythm. The body's approximately 2 4-hour biological clock influences both the pattern of sleep and the timing of parasomnia events. Most somniloquy events, like most other parasomnias, cluster in the first third of the night when NREM sleep is deepest and most prominent, and in the last third of the night when REM sleep is most abundant and REM pressure is highest. This clustering is not random. It reflects the structured choreography of the sleep cycle. not the eruption of suppressed content. The timing of sleep talking follows the clock. It does not follow the drama. The relationship between sleep talking and anxiety has been a recurring focus of clinical interest. While anxiety does not cause somniloquy directly, chronic anxiety is associated with lighter, more fragmented sleep, less deep, slow-wave sleep, more frequent arousals, and less stable motor suppression. In this sense, anxiety increases the probabilistic conditions for sleep talking without creating the specific content of it. What anxious sleepers say in their sleep is not necessarily anxious content. What anxious sleepers do in their sleep is sleep with less structural stability. The anxiety shapes the pattern. The pattern shapes the output. Medications that affect sleep structure can alter the pattern of sleep talking. Antidepressants, particularly SSRIs and SNRIs, are among the most commonly documented pharmacological influences on REM sleep. These medications can suppress REM sleep early in treatment and sometimes produce a REM rebound effect during dose changes or discontinuation. During REM rebound periods, motor inhibition may be less stable, and sleep talking, along with vivid dreaming, can increase. This is a side effect of neurochemical adjustment, not a psychological signal. If you have noticed a change in sleep talking after starting or changing a medication, the explanation is likely in the pharmacology, not the psychology. The neurochemistry of sleep inhibition involves several key neurotransmitters, including GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, and glycin, which is particularly involved in the motor paralysis of REM sleep. During REM atonia, glycinergic neurons actively suppress the motor neurons in the spinal cord, preventing movement. When this signaling is partially disrupted through genetic variation, neurological change, or pharmacological influence, the motor suppression floor rises, and behavioral outputs, including vocalization, become more probable. Silence during sleep is not passive. It is not coincidental. It is the product of active, ongoing chemical work. In some documented cases, individuals have been observed producing grammatically complete sentences during sleep while exhibiting no other signs of wakefulness. No change in respiratory rate. No significant muscle activity in other groups. No memory of the utterance upon waking. These cases suggest that the language production subsystem can briefly operate with significant autonomy, generating output without the deliberate engagement of consciousness, attention, or memory. Language, in this framing, is not solely a waking faculty. It is a system that has its own momentum. It can run without its operator. The sentence arrives without a mind behind it. Sleep talking in the context of somnambulism, sleepwalking, is particularly well documented. Sleepwalking represents a more extensive partial arousal, in which motor inhibition fails across a broader range of muscle groups, allowing the person to walk, navigate space, and sometimes perform complex behaviors. Speech during sleepwalking episodes may be more coherent and contextually appropriate than isolated somniloquy, because more of the brain has partially aroused. The content of that speech, however, still does not reliably reveal hidden psychological material. It reflects the partial awakening of behavior, not the awakening of self-disclosure. Bruxism, nocturnal teeth grinding, shares neurological features with somniloquy and is classified alongside it in the parasomnia spectrum. Both involve motor outputs from the craniofacial region during sleep. Both are more common during periods of stress and sleep deprivation. Both represent incomplete suppression of jaw and mouth musculature during sleep. Research suggests that individuals who grind their teeth at night are somewhat more likely to also talk in their sleep, reflecting a shared susceptibility to craniofacial motor leakage during sleep transitions. The jaw and the larynx are neighboring systems. When one holds tension through the night, the other may release it as sound. The amygdala, the brain's primary threat detection and emotional tagging structure, remains active during sleep and plays a role in the emotional content of dreams. Its activity during REM sleep is associated with the generation of emotionally vivid dream experiences. However, the amygdala's activation during sleep does not reliably translate into emotionally charged sleep speech. The pathways from amygdala activation to motor speech output include several regulatory nodes, most of which remain inhibited during sleep. Emotional arousal in the dream is not the same as emotional disclosure in the spoken word. Feeling deeply is not the same as speaking openly. Narcolepsy, a neurological disorder characterized by sudden muscle weakness triggered by emotion, excessive daytime sleepiness, and fragmented nocturnal sleep, is associated with significantly elevated rates of sleep talking. In narcolepsy, the boundary between sleep and wakefulness is chronically unstable. Sleep intrudes into waking life, and waking arousal intrudes into sleep. Sleep talking in individuals with narcolepsy often reflects this boundary instability rather than any distinctive psychological content. It is a symptom of state regulation failure, not self-revelation. The voice emerges not because something hidden presses to be said, but because the structure separating speech from silence is not holding. The phenomenon of dream incorporation, in which external stimuli such as sounds, touch, and temperature are woven into ongoing dream narratives, can sometimes trigger sleep talking in response to stimuli in the sleep environment. A partner's movement, a noise from outside, a shift in temperature can be incorporated into a dream and elicit a verbal response that appears directed at someone or something in the real environment. In these moments, the speech may seem disturbingly coherent, responsive, conversational, even urgent. It is the dream, not the person, responding to the world. Polysomnography, the gold standard diagnostic tool for sleep disorders, can identify the precise sleep stage during which a somniloquy event occurs by correlating vocal output with simultaneous brainwave, muscle, and respiratory data. When somniloquy is recorded during slow-wave sleep, the brainwave pattern shows the characteristic slow delta waves of deep sleep, confirming that the person is neurologically asleep even as they speak. This technical confirmation resolves one of the central anxieties around sleep talking. The person is not partially conscious, partially deliberate. They are asleep. The voice is operating without a driver. Some cultures have historically attributed sleep talking to supernatural causes. visitations, possession, prophecy. And these cultural narratives are consistent with the intuitive experience of hearing coherent speech emerging from an apparently unconscious person. The universality of these cultural responses reflects a genuine puzzle that the sleep science community is still fully characterizing. How can a system that is by measure asleep produce output that sounds from the outside? Like intentional communication, the science does not resolve the puzzle by denying its strangeness. It resolves it by showing what the strangeness is actually made of. Certain medications that enhance inhibitory neurotransmission, including some used for anxiety and sleep, tend to suppress or reduce parasomnia activity, including sleep talking. This pharmacological effect is consistent with the inhibitory motor model. When the inhibitory system is strengthened, the threshold for motor leakage during sleep rises, and behavioral outputs decrease. This does not mean that sleep talking should be treated with medication in ordinary cases. It means that the mechanism is neurochemical enough that neurochemical adjustment affects it. The same chemistry that produces the voice can, when altered, quiet it. That is not a psychological statement. It is a pharmacological one. Sleep structure changes significantly across the lifespan. In infancy and early childhood, REM sleep constitutes a proportionally larger fraction of total sleep time, sometimes more than 50%. This high REM proportion in early development is associated with higher rates of somniloquy and other parasomnias. As the brain matures and the proportional contribution of REM decreases, parasomnia rates typically decline. The sleep-talking child is not a more emotionally transparent child. They are a child whose sleep pattern is doing the developmental work of building a brain. The voice will quiet, in most cases, as the structure stabilizes, not because they have less to say, but because the system learns to hold it. Post-traumatic stress disorder is associated with significant disruptions to sleep structure, including hyperarousal during sleep, increased REM frequency, nightmares, and elevated rates of somniloquy. In individuals with PTSD, sleep talking may occur more frequently and with more emotional intensity than in the general population, and it can reflect the ongoing processing of traumatic material. This is a clinical context distinct from typical somniloquy, and it does not mean that emotional content in sleep speech proves PTSD or any other condition. If sleep-related distress, including vivid, recurring nightmares or sleep talking accompanied by intense fear, is affecting your quality of life, a conversation with a healthcare professional is a kind and practical next step. You deserve rest that actually rests you. The central question returns at the midpoint. Is talking in your sleep a secret being pulled out, or just noise from a resting brain? 50 facts have been building toward one answer. And the answer is not a simple no. It is a more specific no. The voice in sleep is not a lie detector, not a confessor, not a surveillance feed. It is a motor channel that occasionally runs without a pilot. What it says is not screened for honesty, not selected for significance, and not stored for mourning. The fear it generates is real. The intelligence behind it is not. 40 facts in. A picture has been building, not of the sleeping mind as a locked room finally opening, but of a system that is extraordinarily engineered, with redundancies, suppressors, and fail-safes, most of which work most of the time. Sleep talking is what the system looks like when one of those fail-safes is running at 90% instead of 100. There is something quietly reassuring in that. The fear you may have carried about what you said, about what someone heard, about what the voice in the night was saying about you, is asking a psychological question about a mechanical phenomenon. Let that distinction settle where it needs to settle, because what the next 25 facts will show is how far the mechanism reaches into the body, into relationships, into the cultural stories we tell about the sleeping self. The emotional response to a partner's sleep talking, jealousy, suspicion, distress, is often more clinically significant than the sleep talking itself. Relationship counselors and sleep specialists both report cases where a partner's somniloquy has become a source of serious relational conflict, with the listening partner attributing meaning, intention, and deception to words spoken during sleep. The intervention in these cases is almost never behavioral modification of the sleep talker. It is psychoeducation, helping the listening partner understand what the words were and were not. Fatigue-induced somniloquy, sleep talking that increases during periods of acute exhaustion, may involve a specific mechanism related to homeostatic sleep pressure, adenosine, which accumulates during waking and creates sleep drive, is not perfectly cleared during fragmented or insufficient sleep. High adenosine levels are associated with deeper but less stable slow-wave sleep, producing more micro-arousals and more frequent behavioral outputs. The exhausted sleeper is more likely to talk in their sleep, not because exhaustion unlocks the truth, but because exhaustion makes the sleep system less controlled. Sleep researcher Dr. Isabelle Arnulf and her team in France published a comprehensive analysis of sleep-talking content in the journal Sleep in 2017. Their study of 232 subjects found that the most frequent single word in sleep speech was no, with negations appearing in more than 21% of all clauses. Interrogative phrases appeared in roughly a quarter of all episodes. The findings suggest the sleeping brain processes refusal and questioning more than agreement. The researchers interpreted this cautiously. The emotional tone of sleep speech does not constitute evidence of hidden psychological states. It may simply reflect that the brain processes difficulty more actively than ease. Sleep talking that includes names, particularly the names of people the sleeper has complex feelings about, is among the most common triggers of relationship anxiety related to somniloquy. But the neuroscience of social cognition during sleep suggests a more prosaic explanation. The brain maintains active representations of the important people in its social world throughout sleep. Name activation reflects social cognitive load, the amount of mental space a person occupies, rather than desire, guilt, or confession. Some individuals who talk in their sleep also exhibit somnambulism, hypnagogic hallucinations, and sleep paralysis, a clustering of parasomnias that researchers have associated with a phenotype involving general boundary instability between sleep states. This phenotype appears to have a genetic basis and represents a tendency towards state-switching imprecision rather than a collection of unrelated disorders. If you have multiple parasomnia experiences, this clustering is more likely to reflect this phenotype than any accumulation of distinct pathologies. Dietary factors beyond caffeine have been proposed as potential influences on parasomnia frequency. High carbohydrate meals close to bedtime can affect blood glucose regulation overnight, and blood glucose fluctuations during sleep have been associated with increased microarousals. While the direct link to sleep talking specifically has not been well established in controlled research, the general relationship between nutritional choices and sleep structure stability is documented. The body's nighttime chemistry is not neutral to what you consumed before sleep. What you eat in the hours before bed is, in a modest but real sense, part of the architecture of the night. Sleep talking in children with neurodevelopmental conditions, including ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, is reported at higher rates than in neurotypical children. In ADHD, differences in the dopaminergic and noradrenergic systems are associated with lighter, more fragmented sleep. In autism, atypical sleep patterns, including irregular sleep spindle density and altered circadian patterns, creates conditions for more frequent partial arousals. In both cases, the elevated sleep-talking rate reflects neurological differences in sleep structure regulation, not differences in psychological transparency or emotional openness. The experience of hearing a loved one speak while asleep, particularly if the content seems coherent or emotionally loaded, can trigger a strong activation of the listener's theory of mind system, the neural machinery that models the mental states of others. When we hear speech, we automatically attribute intention to it. This automatic attribution is not a cognitive error. It is the theory of mind system working exactly as designed. The error comes in not correcting that automatic attribution with the knowledge of the context the speaker is asleep. And the attribution of intention is an artifact of your own architecture, not evidence of theirs. The timing of sleep talking within the sleep cycle can sometimes be inferred from its characteristics. Brief, emotionally flat. Fragmented speech more often originates in NREM sleep. Longer, more narrative. Emotionally colored speech more often originates in REM sleep. This is not a diagnostic tool. It requires laboratory verification, but it suggests that the quality of what you hear in sleep is not random. It is structured by the sleep stage pattern, which follows its own internal schedule, regardless of what the day held. Memory for one's own sleep talking is essentially zero in most cases. Sleepers who are observed talking extensively on video monitoring have no recall of the events and cannot verify or deny any content attributed to them. This amnesia is not selective. It is not that the person chose not to remember. It is that the memory consolidation system was offline. The words were produced but not recorded. What you said in your sleep is, in the truest sense, not your testimony. It is the system's output in the absence of a witness, including the witness who was producing it. The acoustic characteristics of sleep speech, including prosody, rhythm, and intonation, often differ from waking speech in subtle but measurable ways. Sleep speech tends toward flatter prosody and reduced variation in pitch and rhythm, as if the speech motor program is running without the expressive modulation of full conscious engagement. Researchers have found that trained listeners can sometimes identify sleep speech from waking speech using these acoustic markers alone. The voice in sleep sounds different because it is produced differently by a system running without its full array of voluntary inputs. The research literature on sleep talking has expanded considerably in the era of affordable home audio recording. Many individuals and couples now have extensive recordings of sleep speech from smart speakers, sleep tracking devices, and dedicated apps. This proliferation of data has both helped and complicated the picture. More recordings mean more documented cases of coherent sleep speech, but also more opportunities for misinterpretation. Sleep researchers who review home recordings routinely note that the same recording that strikes a listener as alarming often contains entirely mundane or contextually coherent content when the sleep stage and timing are accounted for. In sleep medicine, the clinical evaluation of someone who reports sleep talking is guided by a principle that often surprises people. The content of what was said is the last thing clinicians assess, not the first. What they look for instead is whether the sleep talking is accompanied by movement, whether it is disrupting sleep quality, whether it has changed recently. In most straightforward cases, the content never becomes the basis for clinical intervention at all. Sleep medicine looks past the words, because the words, by themselves, carry no clinical signal. The signal, when there is one, lives in the body around them. The sound of your own voice speaking, words you do not remember saying can, for some people, be deeply unsettling when heard in a recording. Sleep researchers note that this experience, sometimes described as uncanny, reflects a mismatch between the person's model of themselves as a unified, intentional agent and the evidence that language was produced in their absence. This is not evidence of a hidden self. It is evidence that many cognitive systems can run independently, that language is one of them, and that our experience of unified selfhood is a construction that sleep periodically renders more visible by briefly escaping it. Not all sleep talking is verbal. Some somniloquy presents as humming, laughing, or unintelligible vocalizations that have the prosodic structure of speech, the rhythm and cadence of sentences, without any identifiable words. These non-verbal vocalizations are produced by the same motor systems as verbal sleep speech and reflect the same partial motor arousal mechanism. The presence of apparent speech rhythm without verbal content is further evidence that the speech motor system operates somewhat independently from the language meaning system during sleep. Sleep talking has been used in literary and artistic contexts as a metaphor for the unconscious speaking without censorship, a theme that runs through psychoanalysis, horror fiction, and popular psychology. The persistence of this metaphor reflects how deeply intuitive the idea of a truth-telling unconscious is. But the metaphor has outlived its scientific support. The unconscious in 21st century neuroscience is not a repository of suppressed truths waiting to speak. It is a distributed processing system that continues its work while attention is offline, and occasionally, imperfectly, produces sounds. Sleep talking does not increase the risk of other serious sleep disorders unless it is part of a cluster of symptoms. Isolated somniloquy, occurring without agitation, without movement, without excessive daytime sleepiness, without waking episodes, carries no established clinical risk beyond occasional sleep disruption for a partner. The thing that generates such significant anxiety in relationships is, in the sleep medicine literature, among the most benign phenomena it catalogues. The clinical world has looked at it carefully and placed it, consistently, at the very bottom of the list of things worth worrying about. The self-monitoring and self-censorship systems that operate during waking language production, the systems that review what you are about to say and modulate it for social appropriateness, are offline during sleep. This does not mean that sleep speech says what you truly mean. It means it says what the language system generates when it is not being filtered. Those are very different things. Unfiltered output is not truer output. It is earlier output. From a stage in the production process, before social editing has had its say. Sleep paralysis, the temporary inability to move upon waking, sometimes accompanied by hallucinations, shares a neurological origin with somniloquy. Both reflect the same motor inhibition system that is central to sleep. Sleep paralysis is what happens when that inhibition persists too long after waking. And somniloquy is what happens when it releases too early. They are two failure modes of the same system, one in the direction of excess suppression, one in the direction of insufficient suppression. Neither tells you anything psychological about the person experiencing them. The relationship between the content of sleep speech and the content of waking thought is not straightforward. Some studies report a correlation, finding that individuals preoccupied with a topic during the day show increased references to that topic in sleep speech. Others find no reliable correlation. The discrepancy may reflect individual differences in how each person's brain processes experience during sleep. For some, sleep continues recent waking cognition. For others, sleep represents a more discontinuous state. Neither pattern indicates anything about psychological health or emotional concealment. Environmental masking strategies, white noise machines, earplugs, separate sleep environments are the most common practical solutions for couples in which one partner's sleep talking disrupts the other's sleep. These are not solutions to the sleep talking itself, which typically requires no treatment. They are solutions to the secondary sleep disruption it causes. The best intervention for a benign but disruptive sleep phenomenon is not to treat the phenomenon, but to protect the sleep around it. The brain state during the first moment of sleep talking, the precise milliseconds in which the motor program fires, is one of the most difficult to study, because it is, by definition, gone before it can be fully captured. What research has reconstructed from brainwave and muscle activity correlates, suggests a brief partial arousal, a momentary shift toward lighter sleep that coincides with the onset of vocalization. The brain does not plan the speech. It briefly steps toward wakefulness. The language system finds an open channel, and the words emerge without a speaker's intention behind them. Longitudinal data on sleep talking suggest that frequency decreases naturally with age in adults, with peak rates in children and a gradual decline through adulthood. This age-related decline is consistent with the maturation of inhibitory systems across the lifespan, particularly the development and stabilization of the prefrontal and motor regulatory structure. The brain becomes a better gatekeeper over time, not because it has fewer secrets, but because the gate becomes more reliable. The quieting of sleep talking with age is not emotional growth. it is structural refinement. Some individuals who are aware they sleep talk report altered behavior before sleep, avoiding deep conversations, avoiding conflict in the hours before bedtime, attempting to think deliberately positive thoughts in case those are what the sleeping mind rehearses. These adaptive behaviors are not without a logic, but the research does not support the premise that pre-sleep thought management controls the content of sleep speech in any reliable way. The mechanism is not responsive to that kind of preparation. You cannot curate what the microphone picks up by selecting better material to record. Here is what the science arrives at after 75 facts. The sleeping voice is not a more honest voice. It is a less supervised one, and those are not the same thing. Honesty requires intention, context, and relationship to truth. The sleeping voice has none of those. What it has is motor output from a system running without an author. The big idea of tonight is beginning to take its final shape, not as reassurance that everything is fine, but as precision. Whatever that voice said in the night, it said it without a speaker. And without a speaker, there is no confession. At the halfway point in the science, the architecture has been laid bare. The neural systems, the neurotransmitters, the sleep stages, the triggering conditions, and running underneath all of it is a consistent finding. The thing you feared was deliberate is not deliberate. The thing you worried was revealing is mostly random. The thing you thought was about you is. Neurologically, not. What I want to sit with for a moment is what it costs to carry the opposite belief. The vigilance before sleep, the anxiety after it, the cataloging of what might have escaped, when the mechanism generating the sound is as unintentional as the sound your stomach makes when you are hungry. Feel where in your body that lands, because the final 25 facts go somewhere the first 75 did not. Into the question of what happens when the science and the fear finally meet. Somniloquy events in adults rarely last longer than 30 seconds in isolation. The majority are under 10 seconds. A single, seemingly significant utterance. A name, a fragment of a sentence, an apparent declaration, occupies a fraction of a minute within 8 hours of sleep. Its weight in the listener's memory may be hours. Its weight in the sleeping brain is nothing. It is not encoded, not referenced, not continued. It ends. And the brain continues its work as if it never happened. The relationship between daytime rumination and sleep talking is indirect. Chronic ruminators, people who replay past events and rehearse future ones repeatedly, tend toward lighter, more fragmented sleep due to elevated pre-sleep cognitive arousal. This fragmented pattern provides more opportunities for partial arousals and verbal output. But the content of their sleep speech does not mirror the content of their rumination in a one-to-one correspondence. The mechanism is not a transcript service. It is a side effect of the state that rumination creates. Partners who have developed anxiety in response to a loved one's sleep talking often find that their anxiety does not resolve, even when logically told the content means nothing. This is characteristic of how anxiety operates. It follows its own threat logic, not the logic of information, behavioral interventions, gradual exposure, reattribution practice, can be more effective than simple reassurance in these cases. The science helps. But the science alone may not be enough when the sound of a voice in the dark has already acquired emotional weight. The reduction in sleep talking that occurs naturally with age may be partially mediated by changes in slow-wave sleep patterns. Slow-wave sleep decreases substantially across adulthood, with the most dramatic reductions occurring between the 20s and the 40s. As slow-wave sleep declines, the NREM sleep stages that generate the highest rates of somniloquy become less prominent. Older adults may sleep talk less, partly because the sleep structure that produces it has itself become less prominent. The voice grows quieter, not because the person has changed, because the night has. The language of sleep, when it surfaces, is stripped of its usual social function. Waking speech is shaped by audience, by relationship, by the ongoing calculation of how words will land. Sleep speech has none of those governors. It is language without social gravity. Words that were generated, but not aimed. You are not hearing what they would say if they could say anything. You are hearing language before it becomes communication. Some sleep researchers describe somniloquy as a form of behavioral state dissociation at the level of individual neural circuits. The circuit responsible for speech output briefly transitions to a wake-like state while adjacent circuits remain in sleep. This local awakening of one system within an otherwise sleeping brain underlies most parasomnias. Sleep is not a uniform state. It is a patchwork, and the patches occasionally come loose at the edges. The fear of being overheard in sleep carries a secondary layer. The listener's interpretation cannot be corrected. Waking speech can be clarified, contextualized, walked back. Sleep speech cannot. The sleeper has no memory of it, no ability to provide context. This asymmetry, speech without a speaker who can speak for themselves, is part of what makes somniloquy feel so exposing. But the exposure is the listener's experience. The words contain no more information than the mechanism that produced them. One consistent finding across the sleep-talking literature is that the emotional content of sleep speech skews negative. More expressions of frustration, urgency, and negation than positive effect. This fits a broader pattern. The sleeping brain preferentially processes threat-relevant and unresolved material. Sleep is, in a real sense, the brain's night shift for difficult work. That the voice occasionally leaks during that shift does not mean the work is dangerous. It means the work is ongoing. The duration of a somniloquy episode rarely exceeds the duration of a single micro-arousal, typically 2 to 15 seconds. Within that window, the brain partially surfaces, the language system fires, and the inhibitory system reasserts itself. The episode ends not because the brain decided to stop speaking, but because the structure that produces speech withdrew again into sleep. The voice does not choose to go quiet. The gate closes, and the brain, without drama, continues its longer work. Sleep talking has no established predictive relationship with waking personality traits. Extroversion, introversion, emotional openness, guardedness. None of these consistently predict who will talk in their sleep or how frequently. The phenomenon is neurological, not characterological. The sleeper who talks most is not the most emotionally transparent person when awake. They are the person whose inhibitory system runs at a slightly lower threshold. Character belongs to the waking life. This belongs to the nervous system. The bed has long been understood as a place of reduced social performance, a space where the ordinary protections of waking life are lowered. Sleep talking fits that logic as a kind of ultimate lowering, and yet the research consistently shows that what emerges in that state of maximum lowering is not a hidden truth. It is a residue. The tail end of processing the waking mind had already largely completed. The most unguarded moment produces the least significant output. And the output is ordinary. Partners who witness sleep talking regularly often develop an informal taxonomy of the episodes, distinguishing what sounds like processing from what sounds like distress. Sleep medicine supports this intuition. Episodes that include agitation, physical movement, or high emotional intensity warrant more attention than quiet, fragmented speech. The clinical signal in sleep talking is not in what is said, but in how it is said, and how much of the body comes with it. The sleeper's own subjective experience of talking in their sleep is, in nearly all cases, no experience at all, no memory of the words, no sensation of having spoken, no internal record of the event. This is one of the most clarifying facts in the literature. The person you are worried about, the one who said the thing that has stayed with you, was not there when it was said. The voice spoke. The person was asleep. Some individuals, when told about their sleep-talking episodes, describe mild embarrassment combined with genuine curiosity. They want to know what they said, not to defend themselves, but because it feels like a dispatch from an inaccessible part of themselves. The research suggests this curiosity is essentially unanswerable. The dispatch contains whatever fragment the language system was working with when it briefly surfaced. It is not a message shaped for the listener. It is sound shaped like one. The social significance assigned to sleep talking varies across cultures and historical periods. In some traditions, sleep speech was treated as oracular, a conduit for truth the waking self could not speak. In others, it indicated moral weakness. Neither framing survives the neuroscience. What the science offers instead is less dramatic a motor output event with a well-characterized mechanism and no psychological signal content. The drama was always in the interpretation, not the event. The question of whether sleep talking disturbs the sleep of the person producing it is largely answered: it does not. Monitoring records show that the sleeper's own sleep continuity is almost entirely unaffected. Heart rate does not significantly change. Brain wave patterns return to baseline within seconds. The only sleep disruption associated with somniloquy is experienced by the listener. The speaker moves through the episode without disturbance, without awareness, without consequence. Sleep talking in romantic partnerships carries a charge that sleep talking in other contexts does not. The intimacy of shared sleep means every utterance, however fragmented, carries potential relational weight. A word said to a stranger in sleep is meaningless. The same word in the presence of a waking partner becomes a data point in a complex relational calculus. Understanding this does not dissolve the calculus, but it recontextualizes the data point, not evidence of the sleeper's inner life, but evidence of the listener's wakefulness at the wrong moment. The research on sleep talking treatment is largely a literature of non-treatment. Because isolated somniloquy causes no harm and carries no established risk of escalation, the standard clinical recommendation is watchful waiting, stress reduction, improved sleep hygiene, and alcohol reduction are sometimes suggested, not because they target somniloquy directly, but because they improve sleep structure generally. There is no pharmacological intervention approved specifically for somniloquy. None has been needed. Something changes when you carry this science into the bedroom, not the sleep itself. What changes is the weight you assign to what you hear, the name spoken in sleep that costs 3 hours of wakefulness. It is not lighter because of the science, but it is differently weighted, not a secret that escaped, a fragment of a processing system that briefly ran without its filter. The science does not take away the sting. It takes away the meaning that was never there. If you have talked in your sleep and been told about it, the most important thing the research offers is this: you do not know what you said in any meaningful sense. You were not there. The voice was operating a system you use, in a state where the normal author of your speech was absent. Whatever you are tempted to confess or defend, the research does not support the premise that anything needs confessing. The system misfiled something small. What escaped was not a secret. It was just the sound of the system itself. If you have heard someone you love talk in their sleep, and the words have stayed with you, the research offers something too. Not that the words mean nothing, because meaning is constructed by the listener, and your construction is real, but that the words were not meant, not directed, not chosen, not offered. They passed through a briefly open channel, belonging to a person who was not present to say them. The words arrived without a speaker. Hearing them without a verdict may be the most accurate response. The science of somniloquy is, at its core, a science of thresholds, the threshold at which motor inhibition becomes incomplete, the threshold at which language production finds an open channel, the threshold at which a fragment crosses from internal to audible. All of these thresholds are biological, variable, and largely outside conscious control. What is inside conscious control is the threshold at which you assign meaning to what crosses them. That threshold, the interpretive one, is the only one that actually belongs to you. One consistent thread through all 100 facts is this: the fear attached to sleep talking is almost never about the mechanism. It is about the self, about what the voice in the night might say about who you really are, and what the science offers, quietly and without drama, is the same answer in 100 different forms. The voice is not a report on who you are. It is a motor artifact from a system doing its job. The self that matters, the one with intention, memory, and relationship, was asleep. Sleep has always been the great equalizer, the state in which every protection, performance, and pretense is eventually surrendered. And sleep talking, seen in that light, is simply one more thing that happens when the performance stops. Not a revelation of the hidden self, not a confession from the depths, just the sound of a brain working through the night, imperfectly, the way all living systems do, with occasional noise, and no apology for it. One mechanism, The voice that surfaces in sleep is not the self speaking without restraint. It is a system running its maintenance cycle, briefly audible, leaving nothing behind. The fear that the night holds a confession the morning cannot take back is a fear about the self, not the mechanism, and the mechanism offers something the self rarely receives: complete exoneration. The voice was never charged with carrying your truth. It was only ever the hum of a system that does not sleep, caring for the one that does. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from watching yourself while you sleep, from carrying into the waking hours whatever the night produced. Tonight's science is an invitation to put that watch down, not because nothing happened, but because what happened was not what you thought. The brain that spoke while you slept was not the brain that knows you. It was the brain that runs beneath you, the part that keeps the blood moving, the breath cycling, the memories filing. That brain does not confess. It does not accuse. It does not even know you are listening. It only ever does the same quiet, unglamorous thing. It keeps you alive until morning, and then it hands you back to yourself. The next video in the Sleep Science playlist picks up exactly where this one had to stop, at the edge of sleep, where the mind produces imagery it did not consciously create. The psychology of flying dreams carries the question forward, not what the sleeping voice says, but what the sleeping mind shows you, and what that visual language, like this verbal one, does and doesn't mean. That video is waiting whenever you are ready. The microphone is off now. Let your jaw go soft. That last place where the day's words were still held. Sleep carries you to where the language system finally rests, where nothing more needs to be said, processed, or monitored, and the brain receives the silence it was always working toward. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Rest well, quiet one. You were never on trial for what the night said. Where curiosity ends and sleep begins. Good night.